muscle brand. You know, that's not cool. I'm Eric, like that's who I am. And so this is Stearium Australia. One of the names I like for it is parchment, because you can see it's super thin. If you pass that around and get a good look at it, it's really thin. The pore surface is so small on it that you can't even see the pores. It just looks like smooth. So this is in a group of mushrooms called polypore mushrooms. This is the cap side, and this is the pore surface. So when we look into taxonomy, whether it be plants or mushrooms, taxonomists are primarily focused on the reproductive structures of the fungus or the plant in question. So this is in the group called polypores, and the polypores disperse their spores through little tubes on the pore surface of the mushroom. So this is the cap side, this is the pore side, and there's little tubes in there that drop the spores, and then those spores wander off in the wind and they land on an appropriate piece of material. In this case it would be wood, dead decomposing wood, and they germinate in there. And when enough spores have germinated on a surface and they link up to form a mycelial mat, and all the appropriate sexes are there, then they can start to produce fruit and produce more spores and continue that lineage, or continue that life form's evolution. With mushrooms it's different than people. With people we just need a male and a female, and that's true with most of the plants too. It's also true with all of the animals that I'm aware of. But with mushrooms there can be as many as 30 or 40 different sexes. So it's not just male, it's like male and female, it's like many different sexes need to all come together and form one web. Each spore will be its own unique sex, and sometimes you need 30 different unique spore sexes in order to produce a fruiting body. Otherwise it would just be a sterile mycelial mat that's not capable of producing any children, or in this case mushrooms. So when we look at mushrooms, it's important for us to remember that these mushrooms are the fruiting body of a mycelial mat. So this is like me picking this mushroom off of this log is not hurting the fungus or the mycelium at all. It's like picking an apple off of an apple tree. The tree stays there, I've just taken the fruit. And then it's a question of what I do with the seeds as to whether or not, you know, I'm interrupting the life cycle of that fruit. Does that make sense? So yeah, this is Stearium Australia parchment. It has been studied for activity against breast cancer and showed some promising preliminary results. A lot of mushrooms are really incredible at developing these secondary constituents, these secondary metabolites that they use to fight off disease, fight bacteria, fight viruses. Their protein structure and digestive enzymes are very similar to ours, and so they have a lot of really promising compounds in them as far as potential pharmacological substances. Now, that being said, as to how much of this mushroom you would need to get a therapeutic effect, as to how those compounds would need to be extracted in order to get a therapeutic effect, we need to do a lot more research in that regard. There are some studies out there, though, clinical trials on actual mushroom extracts rather than, say, an isolate of a particular compound in mushrooms. There's a lot of those too, especially done by big pharma. The pharmaceutical companies, they like to isolate a particular compound, figure out how to synthesize it in a lab, and then patent it, because they can patent a compound. They can't patent a living organism yet, unless it's genetically modified. So they like to focus on a single particular compound, but I'm a believer in, like Jim Duke always says, I think the whole plant medicine is a better approach for us to take, and it's a lot more gentle and it's a lot more approachable, and we can go out and find the mushrooms. We don't need to buy a bunch of expensive laboratory equipment to extract it and distill it down and process it into something that's more useful. We can just throw it in a cup of tea and hope that it's doing something good for us, you know? So yeah, this is Stearium australia, and then this is Shiitake Lentinula edodes. I like that name, edodes.